spring has sprung, and I'm here to tell you why now is the perfect time to sell to corporate clients. Apart from the other three, of course. You see, despite the headlines, it is not the economy that is making it more difficult to sell to corporate clients. And yes, it is more difficult to sell to corporate clients in 2026. But it's not because there is no money. Corporates do have the budgets for your work, but they're on a commodity freeze. They are over the generic pitches, recycled frameworks, and external experts who require too much energy to translate into their real world, their operational solutions that they're looking for. So when your pipeline is stalling, it's because your sales process is built for a market that no longer exists. And to secure high-fee corporate contracts in 2026, you really must realign how you position, time, and validate your experience. So today, I want to give you the blueprint for how high-level corporate deals are actually won and structured today. Because let's be completely clear about what a commodity freeze actually looks like. It does not mean the company has stopped spending money. No. It means that the executive sponsor for work that you're able to deliver is looking at a spreadsheet of 5 different proposals that all sound more or less the same. And they struggle to justify the risk of choosing one. So when you sound like a commodity, you become a line item. And line items are debated, discussed, and then delayed indefinitely. The consultants who are closing high-fee contracts right now, like my clients, like we are in my business, we aren't doing that by having glossier pitch decks or slightly better frameworks, no more qualifications. We're doing it by fundamentally shifting the power dynamic even before the conversations first happen. There are 5 pillars that separate commodities from category leaders. Category leadership is about dictating the buying criteria. The most expensive mistake independent consultants make is operating as a subject matter expert rather than as a category leader. As a subject matter expert, you answer a brief. You bring a standard toolkit to solve a defined problem. And the moment you do that, corporate procurement places you on a spreadsheet next to those other 5 subject matter experts. You're now in a race to the bottom, competing on scope, number of sessions, and price. You're fighting to prove that you're the best at doing the same thing that everybody else is doing. A category leader, on the other hand, they go beyond the initial brief. As a category leader, you know that the problem that your corporate buyer thinks they have is almost always a symptom of a deeper operational friction. So instead of just answering the questions that they're asking you, a category leader brings laser-focused customization. They diagnose the actual leadership or boardroom headaches so accurately that the buyer realizes that their initial thoughts, their initial brief, was probably trying to solve the wrong problem entirely. You don't claim category leadership by talking about broad concepts like culture or leadership or communication. You claim it by proving you understand their micro-specific corporate reality better than anyone else in the market. And when you do that, you don't just win the contract, you literally render all the other proposals irrelevant. Because by redefining the root cause of their friction, you kind of force the corporate buyer to look at your competitor and realize that they're not really getting it. Those competitors are still trying to solve the wrong problem. You have effectively dictated the new buying criteria. So what I want you to do is look at your last 3 corporate proposals. Did you try to prove you were the best option to fill the initial request? Or did you introduce a micro-specific diagnosis that shifted their perspective and make your tailored approach the only logical way forward? See, most consultants are actually terrified to push back on that corporate brief. They think that if they don't immediately say, yes, I can deliver exactly what you ask for, they will lose the deal. And in reality, of course you say yes, that you deliver on what they ask for. But just agreeing to that brief directly is probably why you lose the deal. Because when an executive writes that brief or has that conversation about leadership development, they're usually self-diagnosing a symptom. They're guessing at the cure. So when you step in and confidently reframe the root cause of that friction, when you show them the blind spots they couldn't see, asking them those really insightful questions, you trigger a massive psychological shift. You stop being a vendor who applies for a job and you instantly becomes a peer and a trusted advisor. You relieve them of the pressure of having to figure it all out. And that level of authority cannot be faked and it cannot be bought on a discount. The second point in the blueprint is all about timing. You see, corporate budgets are not unlocked by brilliant persuasion. It's deployed by internal priorities and calendar mandates. Yeah, calendar mandates. So pitching to an executive when they have zero bandwidth creates insurmountable friction. See, when they have no bandwidth, they cannot buy. That's when you hear, oh, let's circle back next quarter, or yes, get back in touch in 3 months' time. Instead, what you must do is you must map your expertise directly to the activation window in which they're buying, the window where they're already funded and forced upon to act. The activation window reference matrix is where you don't change your IP or what you do, you change the angle of how you pitch to match the calendar. Typically, Q1 is all about implementation mode. The budget is fresh, the hope is high, the pressure to execute is high too. And at that time, you want to position your work as the execution catalyst. You are here to ensure that their newly funded initiatives launch without any hidden operational bottlenecks or hurdles. You help them getting off the starting blocks fast. In gap 2, however, you switch and you position yourself as gap filling because at that stage they're starting to fall behind schedule. Concerns might start to arise or even setting in. And at that point, you position your work as kind of the course correction or the early warning system. You are the specific intervention that gets their slowing down projects back onto the baseline of what they are hoping for. In Q3, alternatively, they are back into strategic planning mode. They're looking at the next year. At that point, you want to position your work as the foundational advisory piece they need now to strengthen next year's budget. So you're the advisory piece before the heavy lifting. And in Q4, they're very often into a use it or lose it. So unspent budget is a liability. If they don't get it out the door, they'll have even less to achieve even more next year to even steeper goals. So here you want to position your work as a Q4 sprint, deliver high impact, low bandwidth execution that secures high value end of year deliverables. Even if they can't rescue the full project, it helps. That means they have a high value utilization of the remaining funds or remaining budgets before they disappear. So I want you to look back at the last 3 conversations that told you to, oh, come back next quarter, or we'll circle back in the future, or even we don't have the budget right now. Did you push your expertise against a closed window, ignoring their internal calendar? For your next outreach, identify exactly which quarter they're in, because obviously quarters are different by different companies, and then restructure your messaging to accelerate that specific mandate that the leaders have in that quarter that they already have funded and that they have pressure to execute for right now. See, the activation window is something that most external consultants completely ignore. And when you pitch an executive a brilliant idea, something that they really need at a time when they're under intense pressure to deliver on a pre-existing mandate, then all you're doing is actually causing them stress. You're asking them to carve out mental bandwidth and budget that they simply don't have in that fashion. So when an executive says, we don't have the budget, they really mean the company is broke. That's not true. There's always budget. They mean, I don't have the internal momentum or calendar space to fight for this right now. High fee deals, high premium deals close fast when you eliminate that friction. You don't ask them to start something new. You anchor your experience to the exact moving train that they're already on. You become the insurance policy for the initiatives that their boss is already measuring them against. Point number 3 is all about removing the cognitive load. And as a former CFO and corporate executive, I promise you have no idea how important that aspect is. You see, corporate executives are constantly asked to translate external consultant theories into their internal reality. So when you sell broad concepts like leadership, culture, engagement, burnout, communication, you are forcing the buyer to do that cognitive heavy lifting of figuring out how your methodology applies to their specific daily mess. And the moment you force that executive to translate your value, you really lose the deal. To win, you must completely remove their cognitive load. You must make it easy for them. You achieve that by mastering the micro-specific vocabulary, the language of the exact leader that you're targeting. Diagnosing the high-level symptoms like siloed communication or low morale, that makes you sound like a commodity coach. You must diagnose the actual boardroom headache. Because when you reflect their distinctive internal logic back to them, you prove that you understand their operational friction better than they do. You stop sounding like an internal advisor and become instantly an insider, a trusted advisor. So look at your LinkedIn headline and your most recent outbound emails. If your messaging relies on umbrella terms like empowerment or transformation, you are forcing the buyer to translate. For your next outreach, strip out the consulting jargon and re-message this pitch to only using the exact operational bottlenecks and points that specific executive manages daily. The cognitive load is the silent deal killer that is not talked about enough in corporate sales. Corporate leaders sit through hours of theoretical presentations. They're entirely desensitized to words like empowerment, alignment, synergy. And the exact moment an executive decides that they want to hire you is the moment they hear their own secret complaint, their own language coming out of your mouth. If you're speaking to a COO and you describe the operational drag caused by middle management conflict in their exact data-driven vocabulary, a psychological shift happens. They exhale. They lean in. Subconsciously, they think, finally, someone who doesn't need to be brought up to speed, someone who already gets it. And you cannot achieve that reaction with a generic pitch. You can only achieve that through absolute laser-focused micro-specificity. And this also plays into point 4, closing the belief gap. You see, corporate decision makers, they're not handing over 30 minutes of their calendar to a stranger just to see if you know your stuff. They kind of validate you invisibly before they ever agree to a call. If you need that first meeting to understand their world, you've already lost to the consultant who proved that they understand beforehand. So you need a validation ecosystem. And that's not a complex marketing funnel. That's not thought leadership. It's the deliberate use of trust stacking assets across every single interaction. Trust stacking assets are the micro-specific reflections of their exact problems. It's the undeniable proof that you get it, dropped naturally into everything that you do. It's a sharp diagnostic insight you leave in a quick email reply. It's where you immediately name their priority this week in a DM on LinkedIn. It's the instant authority they feel the second that they check your LinkedIn profile. Every time you use their exact vocabulary to articulate the friction they're living with, you stuck trust. By the time that Teams camera turns on or you go into the meeting, that belief gap is tiny. You aren't pitching, the trust is already there, and the meeting becomes a conversation about the best way forward. So again, look at your last 3 outbound emails. Did you just list your credentials and ask for a chat? Or did you drop a micro-specific reflection on exact operational friction that this leader is facing right now? So for your next prospect, make sure every single touch point proves you already know the reality, even before you get on the call. So if your ecosystem is just a list of your credentials and your experience, you look more like a risk. But if your ecosystem is laced with the right trust stacking assets, when every interaction proves you've already diagnosed their pain, that traditional sales call, it simply becomes a logistic conversation. And the last point is all about protecting their political capital. See, when a corporate buyer hires you, they aren't just spending the company's money. They're spending their own political capital, which means that if your engagement falls short, if you don't fit in, you're not delivering, they're the ones who are standing in front of their peers, their boss, explaining why they wasted time and budget. Because of that, the ultimate internal buying trigger isn't excitement or innovation or flashy framework, for sure not. It's safety. Corporate buyers are heavily scrutinized, which means your primary job is to make hiring you the least risky decision they make all quarter. So that means if you sell abstract, subjective transformation that isn't quantified, you're actually a high risk to them. If they can't easily point to an ROI for their boss, they won't buy. That means your expertise has to have plenty of ROI, but you must change how you package the outcome to protect the buyer, not just point at the ROI. So let me give you an example. Pitching a cultural transformation or a burnout and stress reduction program, that's high risk actually, because even though you might not think so, to them it feels subjective, a bit vague, and quite difficult to measure. Whereas if you're pitching reducing mid-management attrition within 6 months, that relies on the exact same coaching and expertise that you have, but it is low risk and it's highly measurable, and it makes the decision maker look like a genius to their boss and to their peers. So you must tie your work indirectly to measurable outcomes that their leadership demands without adding more risk to the reputation. Make hiring you a no-brainer, not just a good idea, but a no-brainer necessity. So I want you to look at the core offer in your last proposal. Were you selling a subjective outcome such as better leadership, faster decisions, empowerment, or improved culture? Or were you selling a highly measurable outcome that actively protects your buyer's reputation? And for your next pitch, frame your methodology not just as a approach or the initiative, but as the safest, most logical necessity to secure their internal targets. And this is the single most understood dynamic in corporate consulting. We assume buyers make decisions purely on the brilliance of our methodology or the projected ROI, and that don't. They make decisions based on self-preservation. Political capital is the most expensive currency inside a corporation. When a VP signs off on your 50, 100K contract, they're putting their own reputation on the line. And if your leadership empowerment feels good, but doesn't yield measurable data to show for that VP who signed you looks weak. So to win premium contract effortlessly, you must become the ultimate safe bet. You must architect your proposal so that it actively protects the person buying it. So it actively protects the person hiring you. When you translate your subjective magic into an objective, highly defensible corporate metric, you aren't selling a service anymore. You're bulletproofing their career. And that is something corporate leaders will pay an absolute premium for. Now, I know some of you will say, oh, but my outcomes can't be measured. They're intangible. And I challenge you, that is not true. There is always a way to trace the results of your work through into tangible outcomes. And if you want help for that, that's when you come into my work. Make sure to hit like, save, and follow on this video so that you can always come back to this training. And when you are ready to implement that blueprint to sell 5- and 6-figure contracts to premium corporate clients in 2026, then make sure you drop it a DM to explore how we can work together.